Hi, welcome to Inductive Bible Study. Today is the last segment on observation, but we are going to look at a very important aspect of observation, and that is genre. Genre in the Bible. The Bible has 66 books, but you can't read them all in the same way. Why not? Because they are all of different categories of literary style and content. You cannot read the book of Genesis the same way you read the book of Psalms. In fact, the Psalms need to be prayed or sung. Genesis is a narrative, whereas Psalms are poetry. And that is why the early songwriters always used Psalms to compose the spiritual songs. But because we don't distinguish the different kinds of genre, we tend to read all the books in the Bible the same way. Well, I pray that this will change today for you. What I want to show you today is that you will become aware of the different books in the Bible, and they are different in genre, and therefore they have to be read and studied differently. The word genre itself, it is defined as a category of literary composition characterized by a particular style, form, or content. Now, I want you to know genre is all around us. If you take literature, if you take movies, then there are different kinds of genres. There is this, for example, romantic movies is a different kind of genre compared to thrillers or to horror movies or to war movies, combat movies, and or documentaries. They are all different genres. For example, if I were to ask you to open your wallet and pick 3 pieces of document: number 1, your credit card; number 2, a ticket for a musical concert; and then a receipt from the clinic. Now, these are 3 pieces of different genre. Why? Because they have different values and function. So when you look at your credit card, you look at a particular information and interpret it in a particular way. When you look at the ticket for the musical concert, you're probably looking at the time and the date, whereas when you're looking at the medical receipt, you are looking at probably the prescription or the cost of the medicine. Now, when you consider the books, whether it is Psalms or Proverbs, or whether it is reading Jeremiah or reading Genesis or reading Paul's letter to the Romans, they each have a different style of form and content. In the Bible, the texts are classified into genres on the basis of the intent of the communicator on what and how he wants to convey the meaning. So it depends on the communicator, on what he wants to communicate and how he wants to communicate his meaning. Now, that means different genres convey different meanings, and therefore they would require different rules of interpretation. So that is why we want to look at genres. So when you look at Psalms, when you look at Proverbs, when you read Revelations, when you read the prophets, or when you read the book of Kings, the approach is different for each of them. We don't read them the same way because they have different rules, they have different values and different functions. Different genres convey meanings differently. Let me give you an example. Let's say if you come across a genre like a story, the moment you hear it's a story, you will take a different kind of posture. You'll start looking for different kind of things compared to, say, wanting to listen to a poem. And there is a dynamic between the writer and the reader. The writer writes it with a certain tone that creates a certain mood in the reader. I call this the posture of reading. So different genres would require different postures of reading. You might want to write that down. Different genres require different postures of reading. Different genres are all around you. And once you become aware, then you will take the appropriate posture accordingly. A simple example is Psalms. You don't read Psalms, you sing Psalms. You pray Psalms. Why? Psalms are songs, and that's why you find a lot of repetitions in Psalms. So that is a summary here of what genre means in a broad way. There are a number of genres in the Bible. The first one is narrative. It tells about a sequence of real events. A story is being told. The main character is laid out. There is a plot, there is a problem to be solved, and then there is a solution to it. It is not just a narrative, especially in the Bible. It is a historical narrative. Now, I need to pause and explain this to you because historical narrative means it has historical credibility, meaning it had actually had happened. You know, we are so often, we will say, oh, that's a Bible story. And because we are so used to hearing stories, we may not take this quite seriously. But every story in the Bible, especially the narratives, they are historical narratives. That means these are real events. These real events are tied to real places and real people. These are not myths. Now, if you have an opportunity to go to Israel, please go. Because these places, you'll come across the town of Capernaum, the place called Bethsaida, the Sea of Galilee, which is actually a lake. They bring the Bible alive because they are real. Secondly, in the narratives, when a story is being told, there is a main character. You'll recollect when you read Genesis, you look for certain kinds of people. Of course, the main character in the Bible narrative is God. So you always look for God. After that, you look for the main character, man. Think for a while. Why do you think that Abraham is mentioned most often in the earlier part of Genesis rather than Seth? We tend to think about Abraham more than we would think about Seth. Why do we talk so much about Joseph but not so much about Reuben? Because the author had placed these people or this man as the main character. So look for the main character, look for the plot, look where the whole plot is moving and where it is going, and identify the problem and look for the solution. Okay, what does a narrative like Genesis tell about God? I want to tell you, God is involved in people's lives. God is involved in your life and my life. All right, what are some of the books in narratives? Genesis, Exodus, Joshua, Ruth, Esther, parts of the Gospel, and the book of Acts. The book of Acts is a historical narrative of the early church. And the narrative takes the major portion of the Bible. The next genre is what we call procedural or ethical instructions. They call it ethical instructions because it tells us on how to conduct our lives. God's commands to his covenant people on various affairs of life. Laws, promises, and proverbs. Now, proverbs are not promises, and promises are not universal. There are Old Testament laws that are relevant for then and there, but you need to, some of them may be universal, but you need to filter them for now and here through the New Testament. And what are some of those books? Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Proverbs. In the book of Proverbs, you don't read it as a story because they are concise sayings or wise sayings. So make sure you recognize these distinctions. The next one is what we call wisdom literature. Wisdom literature includes Job, Proverbs, and Ecclesiastes. This is collected wisdom of godly people. Includes wise sayings, general truths to live by, the way to live godly lives. You know, for instance, Ecclesiastes starts with these words, meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. But it ends with this amazing statement. Finally, let's hear the conclusion of the matter. And it says, fear God and obey his commandments. And so, wisdom literature. Next is expository literature. They are actually letters, written as letters to encourage, to instruct, to teach and explain things. Letters are written to individuals or groups of individuals. For example, the letter written to the Ephesian church, the letter written to the Corinthian church, the letter written to individuals like Timothy, to Titus. Now, whenever you read these letters, you must know who is writing and to whom he is addressing it. You also need to know why they are writing, what is the occasion and the purpose they are writing these letters. Now, in the narrative, you are just trying to see the theme or the plot. Whereas here in the letters or epistles, some people call them, you are looking at what is the problem or occasion that has arisen for the author to write. What is the purpose here? You need to ask. Example, Paul's writings to the Romans and Paul's letter to the Corinthians and to the Colossians. So you need to find out what they are. The general epistles, however, include letters by James and Peter, even John, Jude. Yeah. So this summarizes these four kinds of genre. We continue. Poetry. The Psalms fit in here, as it is written in words and in imagery and in figurative language. I just wanted to give a tip. If you want to grow in your spiritual life, spend much time in Psalms, especially during your devotion. Of course, you should read other portions of Scripture in a regular manner, but the Psalms help you to listen to the voice of God. So spend time in Psalms. It's full of symbolic expressions, metaphors, word pictures, emotion-evoking imagery, parallelism. Now, parallelism means two or more phrases or clauses in a sentence that have the same grammatical structure. There is the synonymous parallelism, the repetition of an idea in similar words. For example, Psalm 5, verses 1 and 2. Verse 1 says, "Listen to my words, Lord, consider my lament." Then verse 2, "Hear my cry for help, my King and my God, for to you I pray." He's saying the same thing, but in similar words. Then there is the antithetical parallelism that shows contrast. For example, in Psalm 1, verses 3 and 4, verse 3 says, "The righteous is like a tree planted by streams of water." Whereas verse 4 says, "Not so the wicked, they are like the chaff that the wind blows away." So the tree here is firmly anchored and planted, whereas the chaff has no roots, no anchorage, and is like chaff that the wind blows away. So contrast, antithetical contrast. So, all right. So you have Psalms, you have Song of Solomon. Then you have prophecy. Now, prophecy is foretelling and foretelling. And these are applied to other nations. Now, many people think prophecy is foretelling, telling of the future. But the majority of prophecy is foretelling, meaning telling what is happening right now. If I were to tell you about your condition and what you are doing, that is foretelling. And that is why you see the prophets speaking to the people in Israel and Judah and rebuking them that they have turned their backs towards God and they have gone astray into idolatry, and saying that they only pay lip service to obeying God, but actually they have gone far away from God. That's foretelling. But when you interpret prophecy, you need to know exactly who they are speaking to. In one sense, they may be speaking to everyone, but you have to be careful at which level they are speaking. They use symbols, they use figurative language. So you need to be careful in how you interpret. But when it comes to prophecy, at least you know these are the things you need to keep in mind. Now, normally you won't understand the prophetical books if you have not read the first 5 books in the Old Testament, because they make reference to them. For example, in Isaiah 51 verse 2 says, "Look to Abraham your father and to Sarah who gave you birth. When I called him, he was only one man, and I blessed him, and I made him many." Now, if you have not read Genesis, you would not understand this very much. So you have major prophets, like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, and then minor prophets that include Hosea, Joel, Amos, Zephaniah, Micah, Habakkuk, and Zechariah. Okay, we move on to the Gospels. The Gospels are eyewitness accounts of the life, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. events and discourses. It includes events and discourses, little reading except parables. Now, as a rule, each parable has only one point. Now, whenever you are studying one gospel, make sure you compare with other gospels. For instance, if you are reading something in Matthew, see whether it is being mentioned in Mark or in Luke or even in John. So you need to compare them whenever you study the gospels. Finally, we come to the apocalyptic literature. It describes what the end times will be like. It describes the end times using symbolic language, word pictures, images, and numbers, often strange to us. And the books include, in the Old Testament, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Joel, and Zechariah. In the New Testament, Matthew, especially chapter 24 and 25, Mark chapter 13, 2 Thessalonians, and Revelations. So now we have outlined all those categories, different genres in the Bible, and how we ought to approach them. And so when we come to each of these books and when we come to interpretation, you need to take note of these genres. Now, before I end, I want to introduce to you one book, How to Read the Bible for All Its Worth by Gordon Fee and Douglas Stewart. It gives you an excellent guide on how to interpret the scriptures following the guidelines of genre. I would really urge you to get a copy of this book. It's a very, very powerful and a very helpful tool. God bless you.